Well, welcome everybody to the Untitled Themed Entertainment Design Show. Here we are at episode 92. Boy, we're getting close to 100. I don't know what we have planned. I don't think we have anything planned, but we'll do something great, I'm sure. I am your host, Andy Garfield, co-executive producer of TETV with Patrick Kling, who unfortunately is indisposed today. I think he's at a conference in Vegas, and I'm very jealous. So today we are going to be joined by Michael Lewis and Clare Brown from the creative design firm G&A. I would say let's just CJ, let's bring them on. Let's get right into it. Looking forward to have you guys meeting everybody. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Of course, thanks for being here. I'm like I said before, I'm excited to learn more about you guys and what you do and how you do it and where you do it and all that. So let's Michael, let's start with you. Let's who are you and what do you do and where do you do it?
Well, let me just say again, thanks for having us. It is
Of course.
Fun to be here on a show like this. So my name is Michael Lewis. I am G&A's executive creative director, and I work with Clare to lead G&A's creative teams. And G&A is an experiential design company. We've been in business for about 25 years. We do a lot of work with cultural institutions, museums, branded clients as well. We're known for the really cultural work and meaningful storytelling. I'll say just a couple of things about myself and where I come from, because the topic today, I think we're going to be talking about things related to creative work and creative careers and creative management. So it's a little more relevant, I think, than usual to talk about where we come from. But I am trained originally in architecture. I went to architecture school at the University of Virginia. And I think I was drawn to that kind of design training just because I wanted really fundamental, really rigorous design training. But I didn't exactly want to be like a lot of folks who go to architecture school. I didn't exactly want to be an architect. So I got out of school and I worked a little bit in architecture around 2006. And then I've just had like a really diverse, lucky, I'd say fortunate career that I'm grateful for, where I've been bouncing around between a bunch of different worlds. So after architecture school and working in architecture for a little bit, I got interested in working on digital things. You know, I came to architecture because I was interested in the 3D environment and that kind of training, but I was also always really interested in digital and technology. And so I started working at some digital creative agencies in New York where I was. And I got to work on like what people were doing in 2008. I was working on digital advertising and websites and big like marketing as a service software platforms. And I moved around within that world. I started at Schematic. I wound up at another agency called RGA, which was a terrific place to be. RGA was a place where you could work on what I'd been doing with Schematic, which was like really big, systematic, basically UX design at that point. But RGA was a place that was also filled with storytellers, a lot of brand storytellers. You could work on like a big software platform there, or you could wind up working on like a Super Bowl spot. And so I got really lucky to be exposed to lots of both of those things. I left RGA and started working at a couple of tech companies. I did some work for my own clients. I wound up working on financial products at Bloomberg, which might seem like a real left turn, but there was a tremendous UX design team at Bloomberg that I'm really grateful that I got to work with. And they just taught me a ton about like human-centered design and research and UX design at scale on products. And so, you know, in terms of who I am in this role as a creative leader at G&A, I'm somebody who has been like bouncing around, doing the self-training thing, sort of going from different area to different area and like putting together pieces of a puzzle, it feels like career-wise, that I wasn't sure what that puzzle was. And then after tech companies, I got this call from our current CEO at G&A, Scott Wickstrom, who I'd known for a long time. And he said, you know, I'm working at this place that does this kind of experiential design, works on museums. You know, I could really use somebody who has a variety of skill sets, 3D and architecture and digital, and could put a lot of different pieces together and maybe build like an integrated culture around all these different kinds of practices that we do here. And I jumped right into that. I started out in GNA's New York studio, and then after a couple of years evolved into the role that I'm in now. And it feels like this is the puzzle that the pieces together for a kind of creative practice that asks you to be involved in 3D and storytelling and digital and all of those different worlds of creativity.
That's fantastic. It's not often, people have the opportunity to have that kind of like directly fulfilling kind of career like that, where you get to basically do everything you want to do.
Well, okay, I'll tell you. Like, let's take the polish off of that for a second, right? Like, here I am, I don't know, 20 something years later into that process, and I'm happy to say that the puzzle pieces have kind of landed like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I was doing along the way, and I think that's an important part of what we're going to talk about today. And it was super stressful and strange, and I couldn't explain my job to my parents sometimes when I was doing UX. I wasn't sure why I went to architecture school and then wasn't doing architecture. I was, so it came together intuitively, but it was not a seamless process along the way.
It never is, but still, the outcome has been great for you. That's great.
It is for me.
Clare,
I'm really grateful. Yeah.
Clare, I'm excited to learn about you and your place in this whole thing.
Yeah, thank you. Interestingly enough, my career path has also taken a very winding road. I am in the role of creative director at GNA, and I work really closely with Michael, and I think everyone will see by the end of this conversation that Michael and I really enjoy digging into creative practice and creative collaboration and thinking about what the future of the creative studio is. And so how did I get here? My background is in cultural anthropology before I ever was a designer. And I worked in the theater most of my young career. I was a theater tech. That's how I made my money. But I was also in school for cultural anthropology and later museum studies. And when I came out of school, it was a big question of, okay, what do I do with these degrees? And I realized that I really, really loved the hands-on work that I had learned in theater. And I really loved the people, the thinking about people aspect of anthropology. And I was able to weave through a number of jobs towards design. I worked in a bunch of different museums. I worked primarily with exhibit design teams, but very quickly began to think about the process of design, the ways that teams collaborate, and was able to kind of stitch together that combination of hands-on real-world making of things, making of experiences, with the more intellectual work of thinking about what those experiences are like for the people that either experience them or are creating them. So I bring all of that into my role as creative director. I, like Michael, I feel really fortunate to be where I'm at. I spent a long time working at the Smithsonian and loved working within a museum environment, but found that the opportunity to work at GNA gave me a lot more yeses to the really exciting creative things that were in my head, as opposed to falling back on some more traditional ways of approaching exhibition design. So I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That sounds great. Again, it sounds like, you've sort of found your way to this, great opportunity and position, that sounds like it's a lot of fun, and you guys really, it's great you guys enjoy working together too, obviously. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that as well. But let's educate me and our audiences about GNA. What is GNA? What does it stand for? And how does it work? And what do you guys do primarily? And, we'll get into some project stuff later on, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. I'll jump in just to start. I think Michael and I are going to probably tag team most of these questions because that's how we are. So G&A stands for Gallagher and Associates, and Michael will talk a little bit more about our really wonderful history under the founder, Patrick Gallagher, and the work that he did to develop this amazing company. But to bring it back out to a more high-level perspective, we are, as Michael said, we're an experience design firm, and we focus on a creative vision that's defined by 5 magical words that are: we design beloved, impactful visitor experiences. And so each one of those words has real important meaning to us. It's not just a catchphrase. But at the essence of it, we're human-centered designers. So visitor experiences, we focus on visitors. We try to understand who the visitors are, what their entrance narrative might be to any of these experiences. Beloved, we are really focused on creating impactful experiences that people love and that they will remember for years to come, that they will want other people to come to. And that will leave an impact on people's lives. So we are human-centered. And we're focused very much on overall experience design. I'll turn it over to Michael to talk a little bit more about our history as well.
Yeah, this is an important, 2024 is an important year for us. Patrick founded Gallagher and Associates. We now go by G&A. So I guess it used to stand for that, but really, like, we are G&A now. That is our company. He founded it in 1999, 25 years ago. And since then, G&A has worked on 700 plus projects. We look back at our history a little bit, getting ready for this 25th year. And you can see, and like I said, a lot of it is cultural institutions, museums. That's the core of it. We also do branded environments and all kinds of out there projects that we'll talk about. Some of the key things, you never want to mention projects. You always feel bad about the ones you leave out. So apologies to everybody for the big projects we miss out on. But we are known for the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, for the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Those are both partnerships with our clients from the very beginning. They were the earliest clients we started with. A couple recent openings are the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum that we opened during the pandemic in Colorado Springs. Amazing project focusing on, Olympics and Paralympics, but just a tremendous accessibility program there, driven by the Paralympic spirit. We opened the Sazerac House in New Orleans, which is like a branded heritage marketing experience in a historic building there. So that's the kind of work that we do. And there's a lot of, it ranges everything from Holocaust to natural science, all kinds of natural science, all kinds of cultural history, brand work, like I mentioned, like Sazerac, but it tends to be iconic environments, like immersive physical environments combined with digital that do meaningful storytelling. That's one of our hallmarks, is that meaningful storytelling. And over the 25 years, in terms of how the firm's philosophy has evolved and how it has evolved, we looked back at that story recently, and you can see, there are chapters of how the firm has evolved. I think when it started working with World War II and Spy, it was really about getting these lasting institutions off the ground. Like starting a new museum, new cultural institution is no joke, right? It's not, you're not guaranteed that it's going to be there in 20 years. But G&A has worked on designs and worked on financial sustainability and feasibility to make sure these are really lasting institutions from the very beginning. You can see another chapter where the meaningful storytelling really started to evolve, especially as we got into Holocaust work. There's another sort of shift as the iconic environmental stuff started to develop. I love the U.S. Postal Museum from that period. And then as technology got more and more prevalent and present in our projects, you can see this focus on integrating the design. It's our jargon for it. Integrating the design just means bringing all of the different design capabilities to the table, influencing the project from the very beginning, as we have more and more of those capabilities involved, as the projects get more complex, as visitor expectations get higher and higher. And that's really one of the main things that we're still focused on. That chapter that started 10, 12 years ago, we're still doing that. So it's a firm that has always been in evolution like that. but it's also a firm that has a very, very strong DNA. I think when you look back at the 25 years, the and you look back at how Patrick had talked about the firm 15, 20 years ago, you can see that there's this consistent conversation about the opportunity of design. You know, whatever the constraints are of your project, there's always this chance to invent something, this white space that you're starting with, this extreme sense of opportunity. The idea that the projects that we work on can be emotionally transformative for people, that visitors come in and walk out feeling emotionally, you know, shifted, moved by our work. And that, you know, there's always been this conversation that Patrick started about just doing something great. GNA is a place to do something great. So it's a transformative place, cultural work, just committed to doing great design.
That's exciting. I mean, you know, a lot of people can be intimidated by, you know, like the blank sheet of paper at the beginning of the process, and it's nice to hear you guys are just excited about it, and you know, the opportunity to create something great, like you said, you know, just literally change lives through some flats and some medias.
Yeah, I mean, it's a privilege. You know, even the smallest, most constrained project is a chance for invention, and it's a privilege to be able to do that.
Well, let's talk about the process of developing these ideas and starting with the blank page, and like how do you get from that to opening day using, you know, what you're calling the creative studio. Is that a design ethos, or is it just a fancy name for your office?
That's it. Yeah, so when we talk about creative studio, it kind of, that's our shorthand for a variety of things. So, you know, when you talk about how the process starts and how it goes from beginning to end, that's a really, really important question for us, right? So the area of design that we work in is high stakes. The stories are high stakes. The amount of money involved is high stakes. The reputation and institutional identity that comes from our work is on the line. And so these are really important processes to have right? It's not simply an imaginative process. It's an orchestrated process that can take 3 or 4 years to bring a project to life from beginning to end. And so what kind of organization is going to develop that process and ultimately develop that product? And that's something that Claire and I think about a lot, you know, and we talk about that as what kind of creative studio are we making? When we talk about what GNA is an experiential design company, but this idea of the creative studio is something that we still think about because it represents sort of everything that we do inside that design company on the creative side. There's the creative part that is the work, and then there is the sort of studio part that represents the tools, the physical workplace, sometimes the environment, the culture, the processes, and all of that Claire and I are responsible for. And, you know, of all the things that we could talk about in relation to the work, there's the work itself, there's looking at images of the work, which everybody can go to our website, gallagherdesign.com, or follow us on social media and see those images. We're here to talk a little bit more today about this other part that doesn't get all the attention that it deserves, which is really how we think about evolving and redefining the creative practice that we call the creative studio. I think, Claire, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think one of the things that is super invigorating about our work at GNA is that we look at that continuum between the back end of how our work gets done all the way through to what it is that we're creating. And we put our principles of experience design to both sides of that equation. And so we're aiming to be the best experience designers we can be in terms of the thing we create, the experiences we create. But we're also very focused on the employee experience, the client experience, and the experience of the stakeholders for that client, you know. And so us looking at that continuum helps to enforce that we don't just make a bunch of really cool stuff. We actually pour a very cool and thoughtful process into the making of it. And And I think it's something that sets us apart in terms of employee experience and client experience as well. So it's exciting to work here for that reason as well.
Well, it sounds like you guys have created this sort of like perfect storm of rigorously intellectual yet sensitively creative sort of design aesthetic or experience for yourselves and your clients. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's different. We talk about the future of the creative studio, right? And that sounds like a totally intellectual thing, but actually it's super practical. It's super business oriented, right? We have to be thinking about what is a 21st century creative studio? Who are 21st century audiences for these experiences? It's not enough for us to be sort of sitting in where we were 10 years ago and expecting this to be a sustainable model, either a model of practice as a firm or as a model of creation for our clients. So it's both an intellectual exercise and a very practical business-oriented feature of our work as well.
How is it? What do you mean by business on the business side? How do you mean like in terms of like selling your process to prospective clients? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think this gets at a couple different things. So, one, employee experience. So we want to retain the best creative people we possibly can. And so to create, and something we're going to talk about a little bit here, I think, is what is it like working in 2024 as a creative professional? The world of being a creative professional is not the same as it was 4 years ago, just in terms of all the changes that have happened since the pandemic, as well as all the social changes that have happened. So I think there's something to think about in terms of employee experience. That's a business issue. But then for our clients, we're also having to use new tools to work with our clients virtually and in person. We're responding to the changing world around us. We're helping our clients to be successful in that changing world. So there's the client experience from that side as well.
Before the panda, did you guys all work in the same office together in New York or somewhere?
We worked in our three main locations, which are New York, DC, and Portland. And then during the pandemic, in February 2020, we went fully remote over the course of a week. On a Friday, we were all working in that typical way. And then by the next Friday, nobody was in the office, which is, a lot of firms did that. And now, fast forward to where we are here, we took advantage of the pandemic period to hire in more diverse locations all over the country, right? And those were staff who worked fully remotely. And now we've come back into our locations partially, but nobody knows. I can't pretend to say like what I think will happen with that in the future. But our outcome now is that we are very hybrid remote. There are folks who come in more often and less often. We use the offices in a totally different way. But the net for us is that we have to face, among the challenges of moving forward, we have to face the challenges that are proposed by this hybrid remote work reality that we've leaned into, which is working for us, but it proposes a lot of, it's not the easiest. There are things to deal with.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time thinking about what that future is. And when I say future, I also mean now. But I think every opportunity, every project that we have is an opportunity for us to explore new ways to do this better. And so we are continuously evolving the tools that we use and the methods that we use to work together. And we spend a lot of time thinking around those questions of how do we attract more diverse employees, more diverse designers? How do we work better in these virtual or hybrid environments? And also, what are the pressures right now on the identity of a creative professional? So we think about those three pressures a lot in the way that we are planning for the future of GNA. And we
You
think
send them a care package full of like black clothes and turtlenecks.
I'm wearing green, by the way.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, I'd love to talk about you guys. I know you guys want to talk about your actual design process. I'd love to hear you talk about that as well.
Let's see,
Like,
Michael, do you want to lead on?
like the craft of the designer as it is, as weaving that into the whole design process that you guys approach your projects with. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're in love with our process. We're always ready and willing, thrilled to talk about it. I think that, like I said, for the kinds of projects, the high stakes dimensions of our projects, like process is essential. Like talking about process in a vacuum, Andy, for us, like just here's our design process, makes a little less sense. And so framing it up in terms of the context of this future of the creative studio idea that we're interested in, I think is the key thing. So I'm going to take it back to that for a second. So Claire mentioned, why are we interested in the idea of the creative studio? Where doesn't get as much attention, we think, that talking about the sort of really the management and the nurturing of large creative teams in the way that we do it. And so we just want to elevate that, but we also think that there are these pressures on it that Claire described, right? And so the process that we want to develop is in response to those pressures that she mentioned, right? And so the first pressure is the pressure on design professions at large to be more diverse, which we just like mentioned for a second, but you can't just like mention it for a second and gloss past it, right? The design professions at large have been shortchanged in terms of diversity, and we think that creative professions are a tremendous opportunity as a vocation for individuals, but then also as a way to influence culture at large. And so it is just wrong that we are shortchanged in terms of diversity. We have to change that. Processes that we're going to talk about, like design process, are influenced by that. At GNA, process starts actually with the purpose of the company. So we're going to drill down. We'll get into the process part of it, but our entire corporate purpose since the pandemic and social justice movements around that time has become to be a much more diverse design firm and influence diversity in the industry. And so we're always experimenting with that on our side. It has a lot to do with recruitment. And so when we talk about design process, and this is partly where we sit in the organization, right? It's the biggest picture of design process that you can imagine that actually begins with recruitment. There's no greatness in a design process that doesn't recruit great people, and in a profession that needs to be more diverse, we have to show up where more diverse candidates are. And so for us, that's a lot of outreach out to colleges and all the way going back to high schools and programs that we experiment with to try and find people who have creative aptitude and interest. So that's something that we're working on.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to even look further than the typical pools, I guess one might say. Michael did mention that we have done some work with high school students. That is an opportunity for us to help very young people to see new career paths. And so we may not see the benefit of that work for a number, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 more years, but we're hoping that 10 years down the line, we're helping to encourage a lot more different people working in the design field. But on the flip side, we also think about diversity in terms of like who we're reaching. So these experiences that we create are out of necessity, out of reality, connecting with everyone. And so as such, it would be a real misstep on our part to not have a design staff who are bringing more perspectives like the people who will be experiencing the work. So that is a big part of our recruitment. And we think a lot about that, and we work really hard at that as well.
Well, it sounds like it, and it sounds like it's paying off for you too with your process and including more diverse voices in design in general. I think it's only going to improve your chances of a successful design.
100%, because, and I'll give some process anecdotes and some project anecdotes, right? So we work on a project in Los Angeles that I've worked on for the last 4 years called Destination Crenshaw, which is actually folks that aren't familiar with it, it's a 1.25 mile long urban design project. It's an outdoor urban design thing, parks, streetscape, large-scale urban structures, permanent art commissions. So it's not a museum or a branded space. It is an unusual venue, but it has a program of outdoor exhibitry and storytelling that we are, the interpretive program they call it, that we are responsible for, that tells the history and stories of the local African American community as this area gets redeveloped. And so that's a sensitive project, right? That could not be more culturally sensitive. The idea of a process that doesn't include outreach and like actual connection with that local community would be wrong, and it would be unsuccessful, right? It would be unsuccessful for that specific project because it needs to include that community to get their buy-in for all kinds of practical reasons. But the outcome is better because it has an authentic representation that I can't bring to that, right? I'm a facilitator of design, a design professional, but I can connect with that community and help facilitate their own contributions. And so we've hired and hired interns from the local community to bring their work into the project directly. We've had a community advisory council be part of the project from the very beginning. And I have to give credit to the client on that, who is the councilman of City District 8 there, Marquise Harris Dawson, for including that. And so there's a political dimension to that. And that's all part of our process, as much as any kind of design thinking or craft. And that really starts to address what we know about 21st century audiences, right? From a piece of research that I like to follow a lot called Culture Track at our friends LaPlaca Cohen. If you're not aware of their work, check them out. They do wonderful research reports. And they have this insight that people who don't come to cultural experiences are put off by them because they don't think that they're, quote, for me, right? There's some kind of impression about them. And you can imagine what it is. There's an elitism about cultural experiences, a divide about who they're for versus some audiences. And the biggest way to overcome that is this is also in their insight, is to see yourself in the work, see yourself in the project, right? And so we take that very seriously, and we probably extrapolate it. You want to see yourself in the firm, you want to see yourself in the process as a community advisory council member, and you want to see yourself literally represented in the project and in the outcome.
Michael, can I interrupt you with a sec?
Yeah.
There is a question in the comments that I think we can answer a little here, which is, this is one particular answer to this question. The question is, how do you evaluate if you're going in the right direction, and what is considered a success? Well, there's like a million ways to answer that question, but since we're talking right now about audience connection, community connection, I think it's important to note that one aspect of our process is to do really deep community connection work on our projects. We can evaluate if we're going in the right direction based on real-time feedback from community. And so we use our community connection work as a way not only to ideate and develop new ideas that are going to be relevant to that community, but also to get their feedback throughout the process. And so that evaluation in this form comes from that feedback through a community connection process. I'll stop there. There's so many other ways that we evaluate work financially, et cetera, but that's one for here.
Well, yeah, but if I can offer one short answer, there's never enough design critique in a design studio, whether it's the future of the design studio or at any time. And so figuring out, in whatever the work environment is, remote, hybrid, in person, how to get that really, really meaningful design critique is one of our core challenges. We have a whole system and process in place that won't dive into, but once we dialed up design critique, I'll say, figured out a system post-pandemic for how to do that in a remote hybrid environment. I think that improved the culture and improved how we understand where we're headed with the work all the time.
I'm really when is the Crenshaw project already active, or is it yet to be opened?
Oh, it's yet to be opened. It's under construction. And I believe, I don't want to say a date because I know it keeps shifting a little bit this year as it does on big projects, but it's months away. And it's going to open in phases because it is a large urban, massive urban project. But the first parts of it will be opening this year, I would say late summer, fall.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm about 20 miles away from Crenshaw, and I'm definitely going to go check that out. So.
Oh yeah, if you drive by like Lemert Park now, there on Crenshaw Boulevard, you'll see it's worth checking out a park there called Sankofa Park. It's one of the first big installations that's under construction there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift focus a little bit to emerging technologies and how that's fitting in. Like you said, you mentioned that, like, 4 years ago you were doing things really differently before everybody started working remotely, and it's like, and now 4 years ago you could probably have not predicted where the explosion of AI and AI assisted design has come from, out of almost seemingly nowhere. And it's such an evolved already kind of tool. How do you guys handle that sort of ethical morass and design kind of aesthetic and process into your design process, or do you not? And if you don't, I'd love to hear why and like reasoning behind that.
Can I start?
Please. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so one, we have a long-standing point of view on technology. You're right, we couldn't have predicted any of that, Andy. I mean, maybe we could have, I don't know. But what we could have predicted is just the outrageously increasing escalation of the use of technology, the kind of technology, the magic of it, all of that, right? So we have, without knowing AI was coming, we have been thinking a lot about how to handle that increasing escalation, like what it does to us as a firm. One of the things that it does is it puts, and we can debate whether like it adds pressure to individual designers or relieves them from pressure. Does AI make some things a little bit, and I think Claire and I share this, overall net technology's influence on design adds pressure and confusion to individual designers, especially earlier in their career as they're managing them, because it adds pressure on the idea that you have to have this like ever increasing unlimited toolbox of skills, especially technological skills. And we have this very clear idea in how we want designers to develop, which is that the craft of design that you are committed to, whatever that is, whether it's 3D design or UX design or graphic design, or if you're a technologist or a writer in our creative teams, the craft, you want to get that to an expert level by the time you're a senior designer, and you need to maintain that. And this comes actually from an insight from a guy named Peter Merholtz, who wrote a great book called Org Design for Design Orgs, and writes and thinks about creative careers. And one of the points that he makes is that, you can't keep adding to this tool set for forever. And the tool set gets weirder and more diverse. So you need to pick the things that you're amazing at, that you want to be killer at, and then just roll with those. And at G&A, what we're interested in is developing really creative leads, people who can think conceptually, can articulate design at all levels of an organization, from a board meeting to instructing a junior designer. And so after your tool set is built and maintained, we want you to develop those kinds of leadership skills and being able to give creative direction. That's the goal that we want to encourage people to develop. So all of this technology, we would like it to basically disappear into the background. And that's what we say about technology for visitor experiences as well. The most technologically driven experiences, and we do very cutting edge stuff. Our technical director, Jonathan Cohen, has this philosophy that we all live by, which is that we want to make the technology disappear to the experience. Not that you can't see it, right? But that it is not the primary thing, technology for technology's sake. And so when we're thinking about AI, the thing about AI, we think, is that it removes a bunch of friction from a bunch of design tasks. Potentially, you can generate concept images with it. You might, see some efficiencies in the way that it gets applied to some of our production stuff. But the point is, we would like that to kind of disappear. It's just a super powerful tool. And what happens is, when you don't have like the challenge of looking for concept images in the way that you used to, you can just generate them quickly. Now you're really, really, really on the hook for generating images that reveal a strong creative direction correctly. You really need to have a vision, and you can't rely on like the friction of finding the right image. I couldn't find the right image, or this is the best that's out there. It's like, no, it's anything you want it to be. So for real, what do you want it to be? And it shines a lot of light on the fundamental of vision and creative direction, which is really what we always want to bring it back to, even if it's, the most amazing technology ever.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of really good insight in that, and what you just said. In particular, it's like, I'm a conservatory trained composer, and I also do sound design, and I always give the advice of people, it's like, you got to pick two things. You have to have basically just focus on two things so that you can get better than anybody else at those two things.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Build your toolbox, and don't build it too big, because you need to be a specialist. And if you're a specialist, you'll become indispensable. And, I've spent 25 years basically fine tuning my technique and recreating the live orchestra sounds and things like that. And then my approach to sound design, sorry to make this about me for a second, but my approach to sound design is very musical based. I mean, I look at, almost from a musical standpoint, but with sound effects and things like that, and how it all works together with frequencies and all that stuff. But I think that's a really important point that you made. And then also to touch on AI a little bit, and as a part of make it invisible in the creative process. I think one of the outcomes of this sort of like, it's whatever you want now, you just type in a prompt and, there it is. I think that even a lot of creative directors who are frustrated artists, who always are those people that maybe say, oh, well, I could do that if I really tried, find themselves lacking even in the ability to express their desires through a prompt. And so I think they find that, like, oh, well, maybe it's not as easy as it looks, this art thing, even when you're just given this magical toolbox of describe whatever you want, and here's 4 things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for saying that, Andy. I think that's exactly what we're seeing too, which is you still need a human to be able to clearly identify and specifically to identify the creative direction.
You need an opinion, and AI is never going to have an opinion.
You need that point of view, absolutely. And it actually becomes an interesting reflection on the ability of providing that prompt. Making the best prompt becomes actually the act of creative direction. So I actually think that the times that we do use AI, it provides us back a lot of information about the quality of our creative in the first place. So I think from that standpoint, there's a lot for us to learn through using it. But I also think ultimately we're human-centered. We're as human-centered in how we work and in what our output is. And so AI may be a tool that we might use to learn a little bit about what we do. It might take away some of the time that it takes to output creative concepts. But ultimately, I think the human is the most important. So, yeah.
I hadn't considered what you said about using the AI as a tool to test the viability of a project, of a product, of an idea. It's like, is it clear enough to produce an image? Like, is the idea clear enough to produce an image of kind of what you're looking for? That's an interesting sort of new metric. Well, it's very clear
as soon as you do it. I mean, I've watched a number of poorly crafted prompts result in really freaky stuff comes out, and it becomes very clear what needs to be honed and in what direction the focus needs to be made. And that is ultimately the sign of good creative direction, is if you can, whether you're creatively directing a machine or another human, to output something that matches what's in your mind's eye or is even better than what's in your mind's eye. like that's the ask of a creative director, or a creative lead in our case, because we spread a lot of that creative leadership to people across our company outside of Michael and myself.
And that, that way of talking about this is interesting because I hadn't thought about it this way exactly either. But the testing the viability thing, or for some reason, obviously it's a prompt. We talk less about the prompt part of it. It's I don't know. That sounds.
Now there's people out there calling themselves prompt engineers.
Yeah, prompt engineers, right? And so we're not prompters, but I guess we are, and that's the thing I'm realizing is that the creative director role that I saw at places like our RGA, especially, where that was a very influential role, and there was a lot of ritual and ideas about how to do that well. It inherited from places like advertising, where they've really spent a lot of time refining it, whether that's the kind of work you want to do or not. The idea of driving a team was to brief them. And that is not so different. And there's a great brief and there's a bad brief. And when a team didn't do its best work, the first point of blame in those really evolved kinds of creative environments, which I think is the right place to go, is to start at the brief. You assume that brief was messed up. Otherwise, the work would be great. And you assume that the team would do great work. So prompting like a machine to do design is I think what creative directors have always been doing in some sense. And they've been prompting a kind of collective that's not an AI engine, that's just a group of very talented designers. Prompting an AI engine now, well or poorly, is still probably the essential act. And we always want to look at the AI. How good is the AI? How good is the AI? But that's not the real driver.
Yeah, I mean, putting people back in the driver's seat is going to be what we're going to aim for, regardless, whatever tool it is that we're using. And that's because we're creating experiences for humans. So we're not creating experiences for machines. So I think,
Right.
keeping the human as the driver and reminding ourselves that we are the drivers and we have to be the best possible drivers we can be, is a focus.
Speaking of humans in the process, we're reaching the end, unfortunately, of our time together. And one of the things we like to ask our guests is advice you would give people coming up into the industry and how they can best prepare themselves for, becoming a part of your process or other creative processes. And this business, this crazy business.
It is a crazy business. It absolutely is. I mean, there's a couple things that, I think Michael and I might say different things to different new designers, but we want people who are curious and will continue to explore and be open-minded around what their professional creative identity is. And I think that it is, while we want you to be killer at your craft, we also want you to be very aware of the context that your craft is in, and to embrace it and appreciate it and like really direct yourself towards working within that multidisciplinary context. We talk a lot about the idea of a T-shaped, creative person. And so we want you to be able to speak to all the other creative disciplines that are around you, but also to be super, super killer in your craft. What else, Michael? What are you thinking for that?
Well, one other thing, but I just want to reinforce the T-shaped thing. That's a very long-standing conversation and idea about the T-shaped design, or at least since I have been involved in very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary design. But you just can't emphasize it enough, right? If you want to grow your career, if you want to have a durable career, if you want to, withstand the storms of AI, get that horizontal layer and get that vertical layer. And it's usually the vertical layer that comes naturally. It's what you're trained in school. So show up at work and get that horizontal layer.
Yeah.
But there is this last thing that Claire and I talked about as advice for young people, and it is to demand great creative direction. This is what we've been talking about, because that idea of creative direction, it can get a little mysterious, right? Like what do you, it almost as if it's like you're a guru, right? And you have to have this charismatic quality of a creative director and draw people into your vision like a guru. And if you're not that guru, that's not what it is, right? It's a job that a bright, talented, committed person can learn to do really, really well. And it's about, reflecting on a very powerful idea, some kind of vision, forming that point of view that you were talking about, Andy, that opinion, articulating it really, really clearly, and then holding people accountable to it and not letting you deviate unless it's an intended exception, right? And you can show up at places, especially early in your career, where that's not happening. And it's the most important thing, and sometimes the easiest to take for granted. And people tolerate in creative professions all over the place really poor creative direction, especially early. And it influences everything about what you think is a good way to do the work, a good outcome for the work. It's hard to learn great creative direction if you're not seeing it. You might have a funny feeling like, this doesn't seem right. Nobody on this team seems to know like what this project's about, right? We've all been through that, but don't stand for that funny feeling. Get yourself to where you can find great creative direction and learn how to do it. Even if that's not exactly the role you want to do, that is the thing that you need to know about and how to do.
I think my favorite traits of some of my favorite creative directors is people who can really articulate with laser focus their desire and intent of the creative direction. That's, I think, one of the most important things. And second is to be generous of spirit, to not lose your patience with the people that are working with you, that if they don't understand what you're going for, it's like, okay, well, let's try again, rather than getting upset or frustrated, or annoyed or things like that, like the generosity of, empathy and spirit, to help people get where you need to go.
Yeah. There is that old thing too about creative directors who were just created grinding environments. You want to do the best work of your life, you're just going to have to grind and grind. And there, working hard is important, but the kind of demoralizing critique that used to be sort of part of the caricature, like that's not, that obviously that's not tolerated, but that empathy is really important. We talk about putting teams in the creative bubble of safety, managing them in an environment where they can do their best work. And we also talk about, and this is why the T-shaped thing is so important, you want to be an authentic leader as a creative director who doesn't just show up with an opinion, but knows how to make something, right? And that's that skill that you have, because it adds to the authenticity and the empathy that you can demonstrate for having been there. But then you also still have to get in the trenches sometimes. We firmly believe that, like to be part of it, to stay current, but also because sometimes teams need to be rescued a little bit. You want to give them a goal that's a stretch. They might stay up till 4 a.m. working on your brief, and you come in at 10 a.m. and the meeting's at 1, and it's not where it needs to be. You need to be able to lock yourself in a room for 2 hours, maybe with them, and make it work, right? And so that's part of the empathy, and then not give anybody a hard time about it.
Right. That's great. Well, you guys, Claire, did you have anything more you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I love Michael's approach to it. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so fun to work at GNA. I think the other thing I would add is just, I like to think of creativity as this very, very precious thing that really you need to preserve. You need to put a bubble around it. And I think that's what Michael was saying around that bubble. If we think of creativity as this like seed that needs to grow, then we need to actually nurture it, and we need to protect it, and we need to grow it and give it all the nutrients it needs. So as a creative director, one of the things I focus on a lot is how to create that environment where that creativity can just go crazy, and really preserve it. So I think that gets at the empathy part as well. Like, make sure that that's allowable for your team.
Well, you guys, this has been tremendous. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about all this kind of stuff. It's I used the term rigorously intellectual earlier, and I feel like this is one of those rare rigorously intellectual conversations we have on this show. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed hearing your perspective on the process and design and the industry. And I think there's a lot of really great kernels of advice that have been disseminated to our audience now and future audiences. This will live on YouTube forever. So thank you guys so much for joining us today and sharing about your process and your careers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks. You guys like and subscribe to TETV if you're not already. This will be on our podcast eventually when I get around to it. And thanks again, and we'll see you at the next one.